Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. So today we are at day 38 of our complete DevOps course, and in this class we will be learning about Kubernetes Ingress. So people find this concept slightly tricky, or people find it slightly difficult because of two reasons. One is they don't understand why Ingress is required, right? If you don't understand why Ingress is required, then definitely you will find the topic complicated. And the second thing is practical implementation. So people try it on their minikube clusters or on their local Kubernetes clusters, and they will not succeed with the setup. So that's one of the other reasons why people find it difficult. I've also seen few videos, and we also have created an end-to-end video on Ingress on our particular channel. So I'll also share the link in the description so that you can follow the link where we have done end-to-end complete practical on how to set up Ingress and all of the things. Don't worry, even in today's class, I'm going to explain you both the theory and the practical. Okay, so even if you watch this video till the end, you'll get a very detailed understanding on why Ingress is required and how to practically install Ingress and try out the things. So if you have followed our previous class on service deep dive, you'll be easily able to understand today's topic. So if you haven't watched the video 37, that is on deep dive of Kubernetes services, I'll highly recommend you to go and watch video number 37 on the complete DevOps course, and only then come back so that you understand the concept of Ingress very well. Okay, now without wasting any time, because we have to cover a lot of things in this specific video, let me jump onto the video. Okay, so firstly, what is Ingress? So you must be asking me that, Abhishek, in the last class we used Kubernetes services, and service was offering me a lot of good things, right? So I explained you that service was offering you service discovery mechanism on Kubernetes, so it is solving this problem. It was also doing a load balancing for you, right? Services were doing the load balancing. We have seen using the kubeshark utility as well in the last video, and it was also exposing the applications to external world. Then why you need a tool like Ingress, or why you need a concept like Ingress, and what problem is it solving? So before 2015 December, I guess, or November, so that was before Kubernetes version release 1.1, Ingress was not even there. Okay, so people were using Kubernetes without Ingress. That means people were using Kubernetes with just service concept. Okay, and Ingress, without Ingress, so what they used to do was similarly like we were doing till the last class. So people used to create a deployment which would create a pod, right? And additionally, because you are creating a deployment, you will get auto healing and auto scaling, right? These features, and then you will create a service on top of it so that you can expose your application within your Kubernetes cluster or outside the Kubernetes cluster using the load balancer. That is using the load balancer mode of your service. But there are some practical problems which people realized after using Kubernetes. Okay, so once people started using Kubernetes, so obviously these users who migrated to Kubernetes were migrating from the legacy systems, like people used to have virtual machines or physical servers. On top of that, they used to install their applications. Okay, and what people used to do was they used to use a load balancer. So these load balancers were something like, people used to use Nginx, or people used to use F5 load balancer, or any other load balancers that they want to use on their virtual machines or physical servers. Okay, and these are some enterprise load balancers. Okay, so what is enterprise load balancing? So they offer very good load balancing capabilities. Like for example, you can do ratio based load balancing. That is, you can say send 3 requests to pod number 1, 7 requests to pod number 2. You don't have pods in the virtual machines, but just for your understanding, I'm explaining you. Okay, you can do ratio based. You can do sticky sessions. That means if one request is going to pod 1, then all the requests of that specific user have to go to pod 1 only. Okay, so this is called sticky sessions. They can use path based load balancing. They can use domain or host based load balancing. Okay, they support whitelisting. That means only allow specific customers to access the application. They can do blacklisting. That means to say, okay, so these customers are like hackers, do not allow any users coming from Pakistan, for example, or do not allow any users coming from USA, do not allow any users coming from Russia. So you can define your traffic, and you can say that, okay, So this is the concept, or these are the capabilities that enterprise load balancers support. Now, the problem was when these people who were doing this virtual machines and applications, when they migrated from this to Kubernetes, okay, so initially they were very happy that Kubernetes was offering you auto healing, auto scaling, automatic service discovery, exposing the applications to external world. So people used to create the same things that we did, like they used to create a deployment. After the deployment, they used to create a service, right? And using the services, they used to get all the features that are available, and using the deployment, they used to get the healing and scaling capabilities. But of late, they realized that okay, service was providing load balancing mechanism, but the load balancing mechanism the service was providing is a simple round robin load balancing. What is round robin? If you are doing 10 requests, what this specific service using proxy, right? Proxy is updating your IP table rules. What it does is it will send 5 requests to pod number 1 and it will send 5 requests to pod number 2. Let's assume there are 2 pods. But this is a very simple load balancing, because people were coming from virtual machines and they used to get all of these features. Against what they're getting in Kubernetes is a very simple round robin. They are not getting all of these features. And these are only list of features I gave you. The commercial or the enterprise load balancers, they can offer hundreds of features. Okay, so you can simply read and you will see that you can do web application firewall, you can do a lot of configurations like TLS. You can add more security using TLS. So these load balancers offers all of these features. Okay, so I within during this video itself I have listed 10 close to 10 features which Kubernetes was not supporting. So these people were unhappy with Kubernetes. Okay, so they said that okay, service was doing few things, but still we are not happy. And the other thing that they have noticed, so this is problem number 1. And the problem number 2 is you can expose your applications to external world using load balancer mode service, right? You can create your service as load balancer mode. But what is the problem is, every time, like let's say you have 100 services. If you take companies like Amazon, they have some thousands of services. Okay, so for each of the service, when they create the service as type load balancer mode, the cloud provider was charging them for each and every IP address, because these are dynamic and public IP address. Sorry, these are static public IP address. So they don't charge for the dynamic IP address, but whenever the IP address becomes static, so for static load balancing IP addresses and static public load balancing IP address, so if there are thousands of microservices, or if there are thousands of services that you require for your applications on Kubernetes, so cloud provider was charging very heavy. And cloud providers are right in their terms, because you are asking them for a static load balancing IP address and they are charging you for money. Okay, so this is another problem that these people were facing. In the previous example, okay, what they used to do was, because there was only one load balancer. Okay, in the contrary, you have for each application you have one service, right? But on the physical or virtual servers, people used to create one load balancer, whether you have one application, two application, three applications. So they used to configure in their load balancer, like okay, if the request is coming to amazon.com slash abc, send request to app1. If it is coming to slash xyz, go to app2. And they used to only expose this application, they only used to expose these load balancer with static public IP address. So what is happening is, here they just have one IP address which they are getting from the cloud provider, or even within their organization, they are only exposing one specific IP address. Whereas here, what is happening is you are exposing thousands of IP address and you are getting charged. So this is problem number 2. So let us write the 2 problems so that it is very clear to you before I jump on to Ingress and how Ingress is solving this problem. What is the problem number 1? Okay, so the problem number 1 that we discussed is enterprise and TLS, that is secure load balancing capabilities. So if you are using a service, this thing is missing. People who are coming from the virtual machines, they had very good load balancing capabilities like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that I discussed in the previous slide. Like for example, I can give you basic example, like it is missing sticky sessions, then it is missing TLS based load balancing, that is secure load balancing, HTTPS based load balancing. Then the other thing it is missing was some path based load balancing, like I just told you, host based load balancing or domain based load balancing. So if request is going to amazon.com, go to this specific application. If the request is going to amazon.in, go to other application. So that is host based load balancing. And then there are many other things like I told you, ratio based load balancing. So I can write this list to 15 to 20 different things on top of my head, but it will only waste our time. So what is the thing is, the services in Kubernetes was not offering all of these enterprise level capabilities. And the second point is, I just told you that if you are creating a service of type load balancer, then for each service, Kubernetes will charge you. Kubernetes will not charge you, the cloud provider will actually charge you, right? So the cloud provider will charge you. This is a very important interview question as well. People will ask you what is the difference between load balancer type service and the traditional uh, Kubernetes Ingress. Okay, so what you will answer is, the load balancing type service was good, but it was missing all of these capabilities. And also you will say that the cloud provider will charge you for each and every load balancer service type. Like if there are thousands of services, you will be getting charged for thousands of load balancer static public IP addresses. Okay, so these are the two problems, and these two problems you have to remember, and they have to be on top of your head, because this is very important interview point. Okay, so people will definitely ask you in your interviews that what is Ingress, or why Ingress has to be created, what is difference between load balancer service type and Ingress. So these questions will keep coming, so definitely you have to remember those 2 points. And now, how Ingress is solving those problems. Okay, so what now Kubernetes said is, so Kubernetes also admitted the problem. So Kubernetes said that, yeah, we understand. And till that point, what happened was OpenShift, which is Red Hat OpenShift, which is again a Kubernetes distribution, they have implemented something called as OpenShift routes, which is very similar to Kubernetes Ingress. So Kubernetes has understood that, okay, OpenShift has also implemented something to solve the problem. And even many users are requesting us saying that, okay, so this is a very valid problem. When we were on virtual machines, this is VM and this is Kubernetes. Okay, so these customers kept on complaining on Kubernetes GitHub page that when we were on virtual machines, we were enjoying all the good capabilities of load balancers. Okay, and because of which our applications were very secure, because of which we had reduced costs. But once we moved to Kubernetes, we realized that this is a very big problem. So Kubernetes people have also agreed to it. And what people at Kubernetes said is, okay, we will implement something called Ingress. Okay, so we will allow the users of Kubernetes to create a resource called Ingress. And what you people have to do, who are these people? Like Nginx, F5, Ambassador, okay, Traffic, uh, what are the other things? Like, okay, there are bunch of HA proxy. So these were the top load balancers that people were using here on the virtual machines. I don't think Ambassador was there till now, but okay, that doesn't matter. So people were using these top load balancers. And what Kubernetes said is, okay, I cannot implement for each and every load balancer. So what I'll do is, I will tell my users to create something called as an Ingress resource. Okay, so as a Kubernetes user, you will create a user called you will create a resource called Ingress resource. And now all of these load balancers, okay, so all of these companies, what they will do is, Kubernetes said them that you create something called as Ingress controller. Now, what is this Ingress controller? Okay, so on a high level, if you are creating Ingress resource on your Kubernetes cluster, and if you are saying that I need path-based routing, for example, okay, so you realize that you are missing the path-based routing on Kubernetes, which you were very heavily using on your virtual machines. So you can come to your Kubernetes cluster, create a Ingress resource. I'll show you the example, don't worry. And you can say that, okay, I want to create path-based routing. So you can, Kubernetes said that, okay, create one YAML file, and inside that YAML file, say that, I want path-based routing. So you said the same thing, but who will implement this? Okay, so who will decide that which load balancer you want to use? So there are hundreds of load balancers in the market. So what Kubernetes said is, okay, we cannot support all of you. We cannot create the logic for all of you in the Kubernetes master or the API server. Instead, you people create something called as Ingress controller. Okay, what does Ingress controller mean? So let's say that you want to create this specific capability using Nginx load balancer. So the Nginx company will write a Nginx Ingress controller, and as Kubernetes users on this Kubernetes cluster, you will deploy the Ingress controller. Okay, you can deploy that using Helm charts, you can deploy that using YAML manifest. Okay, and once you deploy, the developer or again the DevOps engineers, they will create the Ingress YAML service, YAML resource for their Kubernetes services. Okay, so this Ingress controller will watch for the Ingress resource and it will provide you the path based routing. Okay, so if it is complicated, don't worry, I'm explaining again. Okay, so for example, let's say this is your Kubernetes cluster. What you are doing is you are creating a pod, for example. Okay, so you are writing a YAML manifest for this and you have created a pod. Now what will happen? Like I told you, there is a component called kubelet. This kubelet will deploy your pod onto one of the worker node. So kubelet will also sit on the worker node, and API server will notify kubelet using scheduler that okay, a pod is created and kubelet will deploy the pod, right? And similarly, let's say you are creating a service YAML manifest. Okay, so there is kubeproxy, and this kubeproxy will, what it will do, this kubeproxy will update the IP table rules. So for every resource that you are creating in Kubernetes, there is a component which is watching for that resource and it is performing the required action. Okay, so similarly, even if you are creating Ingress in Kubernetes, let's say you are creating Ingress, so there has to be a resource or component or a controller which has to watch for this ingress, right? So this was the problem. So Kubernetes said that, okay, I can create ingress resource, but if I have to implement logic for all the load balancers that are available in the market, that is Nginx, F5, Traffic, Ambassador, HA proxy. So Kubernetes said that, okay, it is technically impossible. I cannot do it. So what I'll do is I'll come up with an architecture, and the architecture is user will create ingress resource. Okay, load balancing companies like Nginx, F5 or any other load balancing companies, they will write their own ingress controllers, and they will place these ingress controllers on GitHub, and they will provide the steps on how to install these ingress controllers using Helm charts or any other ways. And as a user, instead of just creating ingress resource, you also have to deploy ingress controller. Okay, so it is up to the organization to choose which ingress controller they want to use. What is ingress controller at the end of the day? It is just a load balancer, right? Sometimes it can be a load balancer plus API gateway as well. API gateway offers you some additional capabilities. Okay, so end of the day, what you need to do as a user is on your Kubernetes cluster, the prerequisite is deploy a ingress controller. Which ingress controller you will deploy? Let's say in your virtual machines world, before you move to Kubernetes, if you are using Nginx, so you will go to Nginx GitHub page and you will deploy the Nginx Ingress controller onto the Kubernetes cluster. After that, you will create Ingress resource depending upon the capabilities that you need. Okay, if you need path-based routing, you will create one type of ingress. If you need TLS-based ingress, you will create one type of ingress. If you need host-based, you will create one type of ingress. So this is one-time activity. The one-time activity for the DevOps engineers is to decide which ingress controller they want. What is ingress controller? To decide which load balancer they want. Okay, it can be Nginx, it can be F5, and they will go to their organizational GitHub page. They will find the steps on how to deploy this, and once they realize how to deploy, they will, after that, it can be one service, two service, 100 services. They will only write the ingress resource. Once they write the ingress resource, like ingress does not have to be one-to-one mapping. Okay, you can create one ingress and you can handle hundreds of services as well using paths. You can say if path is A, go to service 1, if path is B, go to service 2. I'll show you that, don't worry about it. But you understood the topic here, right? What was the problem, why Ingress was introduced, what is Ingress controller, you understood all of these things. So once you understand this concept, it is very easy for you. Okay, so the major thing that you have to understand is the problem number one that Ingress is solving. That is, the Kubernetes services did not have enterprise level load balancing capabilities, and which is very, very important. You will say that move to Kubernetes because containers are very lightweight, because all of blah 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 blah. But without security, without good load balancing capabilities, nobody will move to Kubernetes. And Kubernetes has realized that, so that's why they have introduced Ingress. And the problem number two was, if you are creating a service of type load balancer mode, cloud providers were charging you for each and every IP address. Okay, so these were the two problems that Ingress was solving. You understood this thing, and the next thing that you need to understand after this is, okay, how to install Ingress. Like, if you just followed the document till here, or the presentation till here, and you'll go to your Kubernetes cluster, you will find one Ingress example for the YAML file, and you will just create an Ingress resource. What will happen? Nothing will happen, because you don't have Ingress controller on your cluster. Okay, so if the Ingress controller is missing, then you might create one Ingress, two Ingress, 100 Ingress, nothing will happen, because the Ingress is of no use without Ingress controller. And what is Ingress controller? Ingress controller is a load balancer that you can choose from the requirement. Okay, if you want Nginx Nginx load balancer, you can create Nginx Ingress controller. If you want FI or big IP load balancer, you can choose FI Ingress controller. If you want HA proxy, then you can create HA proxy Ingress controller. Okay, once you create this Ingress controllers, once the Ingress resource is created on the cluster, they will watch for the Ingress resource, and they will, what they will do is, basically they will provide you the required capability. If you require path-based load balancing, they will help you with path-based load balancing. If you require host-based, it will help you with host-based. So this is the theory part. I hope the thing is clear till here. If it is not clear, you have to watch the video one more time before we jump onto the practical, because theory is very, very important, and your interview questions will be on theory. Perfect. So now let me stop sharing here, and let me jump onto my other screen and show you how to install and how to configure. Okay, so let me get my terminal. Let me start sharing the screen. Perfect. So this is my screen, and in the last class we learned to tell services. Okay, so what I'll do is, let me check if I have the same state. If I do kubectl get pods, yeah, I have these deployments that we create, these pods that we created in the last class. And if I do kubectl get service as well, perfect, the service is also available. So this is the service. And if you have followed my last class, I showed you how to create deployment.yaml and how to create service.yaml as well. And many people have tried it. I watched in the comment section. So really appreciate you people for doing it. Perfect. So now let us see if I can access the service on the first fall. Okay, so I created this service as node port service, and this is the port. So what I'll do is, firstly I'll get the minikube IP address. So this is the minikube IP address. So I can just use the curl command. Perfect. So I'm getting the output, learn DevOps with some strong foundational knowledge. Great. So we are able to verify that our service is running, our service is watching the pods, and the application is running. Now, let me create a Ingress resource for this. And what we will do with Ingress is, we will set up a host-based load balancing. Okay, so what is host-based load balancing? Like I told you, host-based load balancing is nothing but, we can say that, okay, in the previous example, we tried to access using a curl command, right? So instead of this curl command, I can say that allow users when they try to reach my specific service on example.com. Okay, or you can say allow if they try to reach on example.com/abc. Okay, so let us try to see how to create this. So again, there is no rocket science. What I'll do is, I'll simply go to the Kubernetes official documentation. So I'll just say Kubernetes Ingress. Perfect. So this is the official page for Kubernetes Ingress. And what I'll do is, I'll just go here. Okay, see the example also here. What these people are saying is, there is Ingress managed load balancer, that is Ingress controller. Okay, so you create a Ingress resource, and using this Ingress controller, you can define how to route the traffic for your applications, or how to route the traffic for your pods. I'll also paste the link in the description of the previous video. I think I did that 2 to 3 months back. That is a very, very informative video, because we spent almost more than 1 hour explaining you different types of Ingress resources, how to create them, how to create path-based load balancing, how to do SSL offloading, how to do pass through. So a lot of things in very detail. After watching this video, if you have time, definitely watch that video as well. Okay, perfect. So here I'll just copy this example. Instead of this, let me go for host. Okay, so this is an example which has host. Go through all the examples. You can just follow the documentation, and you can go through all the examples as well. So I will do ingress.yaml. Okay, and what I will do is I'll just modify these fields. So instead of ingress wildcard host, I'll just say ingress example. So let us keep the same foo.bar.com, no problem with it, right? Instead of example.com, let us just keep it as foo.bar.com. And now I'll say if anybody wants to reach my application, my service, okay, so if they hit on foo.bar.com/bar, okay, so they should reach the service one, and they should typically you have to provide what is your service name and what is your service port. So let us see what is my service name. kubectl get svc. So this is my service name, right? So let me go to my Ingress YAML, and let me just replace the service name. My port number is 80, so I don't have any problem there. Perfect. So now let us deploy this file kubectl apply -f ingress.yaml, and let me see if something is happening. Okay, so the ingress is created. If I do kubectl get ingress, you will notice that the ingress is created, but the address field is empty. And you will see that nothing will happen. Like even if I try to replace this curl command, and instead of this, what I'll do is I'll just say foo.bar.com. So this is domain based routing. Okay, so what we are achieving here is domain based routing. And I will say foo.bar.com slash, for example, what was the path that we have provided /bar. Okay, and if I try to hit, nothing will happen here. Okay, so the reason here nothing is happening is because you haven't created Ingress controller, right? So only if you create the Ingress controller, then your this thing will start working, right? The ingress should be read by Ingress controller. So what we need to do is firstly install the Ingress controller. So let me install Nginx Ingress controller, because Nginx is a quite popular one. So again, I'll just follow the Kubernetes documentation and say Kubernetes Ingress install. And this is the example documentation where I can search for Ingress controllers here. There are bunch of Ingress controllers that Kubernetes supports, like I explained you. There is nothing like Kubernetes supports. Actually, as load balancing companies, they can create the Ingress controllers. Okay, so all of these companies have implemented their Ingress controllers. Like Nginx has their own Ingress controller, HAProxy has their own, F5 has their own. Okay, so Apache has their own Ingress controller. Like you can also create your own Ingress controller if you have a load balancer. Perfect. So let us see Nginx Ingress controller, because it's a very lightweight and simple Ingress controller. Let us see how to install. So if you are trying to install on Minikube, like they provide you some very easy steps. Where is this? Nginx Ingress controller works with Kubernetes. Perfect. So you can just say try Nginx Ingress controller. Okay. Here the steps are not good. I can just say Kubernetes Nginx Ingress controller Minikube, because I'm installing on Minikube. So, there is a very good documentation, straightforward. Like you can use this same example that I'm showing you. Just search for Kubernetes Nginx Ingress controller Minikube. And this is one simple command that will install Nginx Ingress controller on your Minikube cluster. So all that you need to do is Minikube enable add-ons, add-ons enable Ingress, and that will create a Ingress controller for you. Right? So it's a very simple step that you have to do. Additionally, like if you want to know how to deploy Ingress controller for your production, like in production you will not use Minikube. Probably you are using EKS clusters or OpenShift or some things, right? So in such case, go back to the documentation that I showed you. Just search for Kubernetes Ingress. Okay, go back here and choose which Ingress controller you want. Let us say that you are doing this in your organization. So the steps you will follow is go to this Ingress controller, and let's say you are using same Nginx Ingress controller. Okay, instead of choosing the page, this page where you will only be able to install for Minikube, okay, go back here, and in the documentation, what you need to do. So these are individual documentations, right? For every Ingress controller, you have their own documentation. So you can come here and you can provide, you can look for the steps to install. Where is this? Installation steps. Let us search for install directly. Okay, let us choose a different Ingress controller. I think they have complicated the steps here. Let me just search for ambassador. Okay, so I took this randomly, and here once you click on quick start, so again this is asking for some. Okay, don't worry. So they are just asking for all the sign up and all the things, but you can just search for their official product documentation and say, for example, ambassador Ingress controller installation. Okay, so just search in Google like this and you will directly find the steps for installing ambassador Ingress controller, or anything that is required for your organization. So if you are doing on Minikube, you don't have to worry about anything. Like this is the official documentation for ambassador installing ambassador Ingress controller. Okay, so you have the direct steps here: install with Helm, install with kubectl YAML. So on your production cluster you can choose probably Helm. So click on the Helm instructions and you can install them using these specific commands. But for Minikube, like I told you, we just have to do Minikube add-ons enable Ingress and it will install the Ingress controller for us. So let us see if the Ingress controller is installed or not. End of the day, Ingress controller is also a pod. So kubectl get pods minus a, because I'm not sure in which namespace it is installed, and just say Nginx. So see here, so Nginx Ingress controller is up and running, and in which namespace it has created its own namespace called Ingress Nginx. Okay, and let us try to see the logs and let us see if it has identified the Ingress resource that we have created. kubectl logs minus n, what was the namespace? Ingress-nginx. Okay, so click on enter and it should identify the Ingress resource that we have created. So what was the Ingress resource that we have created? See here, Ingress example. We have created in the default namespace and the name was Ingress example. Okay, so it said that it has identified that we have created an Ingress resource and it has successfully synced as well. So what does it mean like it's synced? So it will go to the Nginx load balancer configuration, that is nginx.conf file. Okay, and it will update some Ingress related configuration for, or load balancer related configuration for the Ingress resource that we created. And you don't have to go into these details at this point of time. So with using the Ingress controllers, you will understand, like don't learn everything on day one. Eventually you will understand what is happening under the hood. But as I showed you in the pod logs, it has identified that Abhishek has created an Ingress called example Ingress or Ingress example in the default namespace, right? This is the default namespace, and it said that the configuration is synced. Okay, for example, tomorrow you are getting any error, what you need to do is you have to go back and see in the pod.logs. And now if you notice, this address field was not there previously, but it is updated now. Okay, so if I can show you that, I don't know if my terminal, okay, so the logs are deleted, but address field was not there previously, but after creating the Ingress controller, this address field is populated. That means to say now I can access, I can use the Ingress resource on foo.bar.com. What was the Ingress resource that we have created? This Ingress example now can be accessed on foo.bar.com/bar. The reason why I can access is because I have used the Ingress controller, right? And the Ingress controller has updated the configuration. So in your production environment, this is enough. But if you are trying on your local Kubernetes cluster, you have to do one more configuration. That is, you have to update the /etc host configuration. Okay, you have to update this file. Why you need to update this file and why you don't need to update this in production is because you are doing on local and you have not done this domain mapping. So this foo.bar.com has to be mapped with the domain or IP address that is 192.168.64.11. So this is my minikube, or this is my Ingress IP address, not minikube. This is my Ingress IP address. So whenever I try to say foo.bar.com, like if you ping and say foo.bar.com, this IP address does not exist, right? This domain does not exist. In your real-time production environment, for example, for people at Amazon, they might be using amazon.com, and amazon.com is a real domain which does exist. So in their Ingress resource, what they will do is they will simply mention here as amazon.com. But because we are not a company and we are just doing a demo video, so I cannot go to GoDaddy and purchase a domain, right? So that's why I simply said foo.bar.com. But what you can do is you can mock this behavior, or you can create a dummy behavior here. Like you can confuse your laptop, or you can update the etc host file, like sudo vim/etc host. Update this host file and tell the host file that let just me provide the password. So you can just tell it, right? I know this IP address called, what was the IP address? Sorry, I have to go back. So you can tell them that, okay, if somebody is trying to reach foo.bar.com, okay, you can tell them that I know this domain called foo.bar.com, and just provide this IP address and tell them that, or tell the machine that foo.bar.com. Okay, so this IP address, this domain will be resolved on this specific IP address. Okay, so now if you try to access foo.bar.com, it will try to reach 192.168.64.11. So this way you can mimic the behavior or mock the behavior, but this is not production use case. In production, you don't have to do all of these things. You can simply ask your manager, or you can simply ask your company, what is the domain that we use, and you can provide the domain name. Now, if I try to ping foo.bar.com, okay, so you will notice that, okay, so the request is not reaching yet, but in some time you will notice that the request will reach onto foo.bar.com. Okay, so did I do any mistake here? No, there is no mistake. So okay, there are some previous entries. I have to delete these entries. Okay, right. Perfect. So in some time, what you will notice is when somebody tries to reach on this specific foo.bar.com, you can tell through your curl request, or you can tell through /etc host. Even if you don't want to update this etc host, you can also tell that in your curl command that, okay, I know what is foo.bar.com. You can resolve if somebody tries to access foo.bar.com, just resolve this on IP address 192.168.64.11. Okay, so now what will happen after some time is you will be able to reach the application. Just replace the curl command with foo.bar.com and your application will be reached. Now, okay, I can go into that practicals, but before that, you need to understand that go through this document where you will find multiple other things. Like this was just example of host and path based routing, right? Similarly, you can do TLS based routing. So what is TLS? Just search for TLS here and you will see that you can create secure Kubernetes ingresses as well. That means to say that this ingress resource that I have created, anybody can access on the HTTP request. But in production real-time use cases, for example, you are accessing google.com, you will access on HTTPS. So these all things can also be done using Ingress. And if you want to do this, if you want to try the practical, okay, you can follow the video that I'm pasting in the description. Okay, it has everything. Like I have shown all the types of ingress that were available. I think it was made 2 to 3 months back. I have shown all the type of ingresses, TLS, without TLS, host base, path base, wildcard entry. So follow that video after this so that you understand the entire concept. Okay, so if you like the button, click on the like button. If you have understood the concept of ingress, definitely comment on the video, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everyone. Bye.